The day my brother left, nobody screamed. Nobody begged. Nobody even noticed right away. And that is the part that still breaks my heart. Because the person who held our entire family together was never the loudest one in the room. He was never the one demanding attention. He never argued, never complained, never asked for credit. He was the quiet one, the kind one, the one who always said, "It is fine, I will do it," even when it was not fine at all. His name was Daniel. And for as long as I can remember, Daniel was the one who made our family work. I'm Claire, by the way. And if you are listening right now, I need you to stay with me until the end. Because what happened in our house did not fully make sense until after he was gone. We were one of those families that looked normal from the outside. A regular American family. A little messy, a little tired, always busy. We had bills, arguments, grocery lists taped to the fridge, and all the usual chaos. My dad worked long hours and came home exhausted. My mom tried her best, but she was always overwhelmed. My older brother, Mark, thought the world revolved around him. And my younger sister, Emily, had the emotional intensity of a thunderstorm. Then there was Daniel. Daniel was the middle child, which already meant nobody paid enough attention to him. But somehow, he made that position work in the most selfless way possible. He remembered birthdays. He folded laundry without being asked. He fixed broken things around the house before anyone even noticed they were broken. If Mom forgot to thaw the chicken for dinner, Daniel would quietly order takeout. If Dad came home angry, Daniel would be the one to calm the room. If Emily had a panic attack before school, Daniel would sit beside her on the couch and say, "Breathe with me. Just breathe." If Mark needed money, Daniel somehow had it. If I needed help with homework, Daniel stayed up late with me. He was always there. Always. And the worst part, we all got used to it. That is what hurts the most when I look back. We did not just love Daniel. We relied on him. We used him in the quietest, most invisible way possible. Not because we were cruel people, not because we planned to hurt him, but because he made it so easy. He never protested. He never said, "I am tired." He never said, "No." He never said, "Why is it always me?" He just kept showing up. And because he kept showing up, we stopped noticing what it cost him. I remember one Tuesday evening clearly. Mom was stressed because the electricity bill was late. Dad was in a bad mood because of work. Mark was angry because he had argued with his girlfriend. Emily was crying because her favorite hoodie had disappeared. And me? I was trying to finish a school project while pretending I was not also upset about my own life. The kitchen was loud. Voices overlapped. No one was listening to anyone else. Then Daniel walked in. He was carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and a paper tray of tacos in the other. Nobody had asked him to get dinner. Nobody had asked him to save the night. He just did it. He set the food down and said, "I thought we could use a break." And just like that, the room changed. That was Daniel. He did not fix problems with big speeches. He fixed them with quiet actions. He was never trying to be a hero. He was just trying to keep us from falling apart. But the truth was, the family had already started leaning too hard on him. Daniel worked full-time at a small logistics company downtown. Not a glamorous job. Not the kind of thing people post online. But he was good at it. He was dependable. He never missed a shift. Still, even after work, he came home and carried the rest of us. He cooked when Mom was too tired. He drove Emily to dance practice. He helped Dad with paperwork. He repaired the sink when it leaked. He listened when I cried about my classmates, my grades, my future. He listened when nobody else had patience left. And if I am being honest, he listened when he was already empty. There were nights I would find him in the backyard, sitting alone on the old patio chair with his coffee gone cold in his hand, staring at nothing. I used to ask, "Are you okay?" And he would always smile and say, "Yeah, just tired." That was his answer for everything. Just tired. I should have known then that tired was not the whole truth. I should have seen what we were doing to him. But I did not. None of us did. Because Daniel was so good at making hardship look invisible. And then one day he stopped. Not with a fight. Not with a warning. Not with a dramatic scene. He just stopped. It happened on a Friday morning. I woke up late, as usual, and walked into the kitchen expecting to see Daniel making coffee, humming quietly to himself while packing lunch for Emily. But the kitchen was empty. No coffee pot on, no lunch bags, no note. At first, I thought he had overslept. Then I heard Mom calling his name from upstairs. Then Dad asked where his car keys were. Then Emily said, "Did Daniel already leave?" We all assumed he was just out running an errand. But then we found the envelope. It was on the dining table. My name was written on the front. Claire. Just my name. No smiley face. No heart. No extra words. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter. Not angry. Not bitter. Not dramatic. Just honest. He wrote, "Claire, I am leaving today. Please do not try to find me right away. I need to be somewhere that does not require me to fix everything. I love you all. I always have. But I am tired in a way I cannot explain anymore. I have spent too many years making myself smaller so the rest of you could stay comfortable. I do not blame you for everything, but I cannot keep disappearing inside this family just to keep it standing. I need to learn who I am when nobody needs anything from me every second. Please tell Mom and Dad I am safe. I will contact you when I am ready. Daniel." I read it once, then again, then a third time because my brain refused to believe what my eyes had seen. Daniel had left. Daniel had actually left. And for the first time in my life, the house felt wrong without him. Not just quiet. Wrong. Mom sat down so fast I thought she might faint. Dad kept saying, "He'll come back. He has to come back." Emily started crying. Mark got angry. Not sad first. Angry. Why would he do this? He demanded. Why didn't he say something? And I remember standing there with the letter in my hand, thinking the most painful thought of my life. He did say something. He said it every day. We just never listened. That weekend, everything started falling apart. And I mean everything. The sink leaked again. Dad could not find his insurance paperwork. Emily missed her dance class because no one remembered the schedule. Mom forgot to thaw food and ordered expensive delivery for 3 nights in a row. Mark ran out of gas because he assumed someone else would handle it. The laundry piled up. The house got messy. The bills got misplaced. The phone calls got missed. There was no emergency. No catastrophe. No explosion. Just the slow, ugly proof that Daniel had been the invisible glue holding everything together. And once he was gone, the cracks showed everywhere. The worst part was not even the chores. It was the silence between us. Because without Daniel moving through the house like a quiet little bridge between everybody's emotions, we suddenly had to face each other directly. And none of us were prepared for that. Mom said she felt ashamed. Dad got defensive. Mark said Daniel was overreacting. Emily said she missed him and did not understand why he would leave her. And me? I sat there and cried because I finally understood. I understood that Daniel did not leave because he stopped loving us. He left because loving us had started to erase him. A week later, I found something else. I was cleaning Daniel's room. Or maybe I should say I was finally looking at it. Because for years I had barely noticed how much of himself he had hidden there. His room was painfully neat. A bed made tightly enough to bounce a coin. A desk with receipts, notebook paper, and a cheap lamp. A shelf with old books. a drawer full of batteries, spare chargers, tape, and tools. And under the bed, in a dusty shoebox, I found a stack of journals. I should not have read them. I know that, but I did. And by the second page, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. He had written about everything, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, devastating way. He wrote about being the easy one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. He wrote that people only notice you when you stop helping. He wrote that every time he said yes when he wanted to say no, a little piece of him disappeared. He wrote that he was proud of us, but also exhausted by how little anyone asked how he was really doing. And one line still stays with me to this day. He wrote, "I do not think my family would fall apart if I left. I think they would just finally have to hold themselves." That sentence changed me. It changed all of us. Because it was true. Painfully true. The next few days were hard. Really hard. Mom cried more than I had ever seen her cry. Dad stopped pretending everything was fine. Mark got quieter. Emily kept asking if Daniel had blocked her number. And I started answering messages from him only when he sent them. Because yes, he was safe. He had rented a small apartment 2 towns over. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for one person. He said he needed silence. He said he needed sleep. He said he needed to wake up without feeling guilty for not solving everyone's problems before breakfast. I wanted to ask him to come home. I wanted to tell him we needed him. But he already knew that. That was the problem. He had spent years knowing it. Instead, I did something I had never done before. I told the truth. I told my family that Daniel did not owe us his life just because he loved us. I told Mark that being annoyed was not the same thing as being abandoned. I told Dad that strength is not making one child carry the whole weight of the house. I told Mom that kindness without boundaries can become a prison. And I told Emily that loving Daniel meant respecting why he left. At first, no one wanted to hear it. But truth has a way of sitting in a room until everyone has to face it. So we started changing. Slowly, painfully, awkwardly. Dad learned how to manage the bills. Mom started asking for help instead of assuming Daniel would do it. Mark began handling his own responsibilities without expecting someone else to rescue him. Emily learned that she could comfort herself and not rely on Daniel to absorb every tear. And me? I started becoming someone Daniel would not have to worry about. I learned how to cook, how to manage my own schedule, how to speak up, how to stop waiting for someone else to fix what I was capable of fixing myself. We were not perfect, not even close. But for the first time in years, the house began to feel like a family home again instead of a service station with one overworked employee. 3 months after Daniel left, he visited for 1 hour. Just one. He came on a Sunday afternoon. No dramatic music, no grand apology, no tears at the door. He walked in wearing a plain navy jacket and carrying a coffee from the gas station. He looked healthier, not completely healed, but lighter. And when I saw him, I realized something that made me both happy and ashamed. He looked more like himself than he had in years. Mom cried when she hugged him. Dad said he was proud of him. Mark apologized, though it was clumsy. Emily held him so tightly he almost dropped his coffee. And I just stood there, staring at my brother because I could finally see what we had failed to see for so long. He had not been leaving us. He had been saving himself. We sat together in the living room, and nobody made him cook dinner. Nobody handed him a list. Nobody asked him to solve anything. We just talked. And for once, Daniel was not the quiet one who disappeared into the background. He was simply a person, a son, a brother, a man who'd been carrying too much for too long. Before he left, he said something I will never forget. He looked around the room and said, "I love you all, but love should not feel like being needed until you disappear." No one spoke for a long time after that, because none of us had a good answer, voice low, reflective. And maybe that is the lesson in all of this. Not just for my family, for all of us. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is not weak. Sometimes they are the strongest one there. Sometimes the one who never complains is the one who is hurting most. Sometimes the person who keeps everyone together is the one who is quietly falling apart. And sometimes when they finally leave, everybody suddenly notices the weight they had been carrying all along. Daniel did not leave because he stopped loving us. He left because he finally loved himself enough to stop surviving on fumes. That is not selfish. That is not cruel. That is survival. And I will never again mistake silence for peace. I will never again confuse obedience with kindness. I will never again assume the person who says, "It is fine," actually means it is fine. Today our family is different, not perfect. Different? We still argue sometimes. We still forget things. We still make mistakes. But now when someone is tired, they say so. When someone needs help, they ask. When someone is overwhelmed, we notice. And when I look back on the version of our family that existed before Daniel left, I do not just see neglect. I see blindness. The kind that happens when one person gives so much that everyone else forgets to look at the cost. Daniel taught us the hardest lesson of our lives by walking away quietly. He taught us that being loved should not mean being used. He taught us that peace built on one person's exhaustion is not peace at all. And he taught me something I will carry forever. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop holding up a broken system with their bare hands. So if there is someone in your life who is always the one helping, always the one fixing, always the one saying yes, always the one making things easier for everyone else, please do not wait until they disappear to realize what they were carrying. Please see them now. Please thank them now. Please ask how they are really doing now. Because by the time someone like Daniel leaves, for a long time after that Sunday visit, I kept replaying Daniel's words in my head. Love should not feel like being needed until you disappear. I would hear that sentence while washing dishes. I would hear it while folding laundry. I would hear it while sitting in the kitchen at night, with the house finally quiet. And every time I heard it, I felt something inside me shift, because I realized Daniel had not been speaking only to us. He had been speaking for every person who has ever been treated like a solution instead of a human being. For every quiet son, every gentle daughter, every tired parent, every brother, sister, friend, spouse, or child who keeps holding everything together until they no longer recognize themselves. After that visit, Daniel did not come home right away. And at first that made Mom panic. She would ask me every few days, "Did he say when he's coming back?" And every time I would answer, "No, Mom. He said when he is ready." She did not like that answer. None of us did, really, because it forced us to wait in a way we were not used to. We were used to Daniel answering quickly, used to Daniel fixing things fast, used to Daniel carrying urgency for everyone else. Now we had to sit with uncertainty. And honestly, we deserved that discomfort. We had spent years letting him carry ours. That winter changed us more than any argument ever could. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was small things repeated over and over that slowly reshaped our family. Dad started cooking on Tuesdays. Not well at first. The first time he made pasta, it tasted like boiled regret. Emily and I still laugh about that. But he tried again. And again. Mom learned how to organize bills without crying. Mark started showing up on time to family dinners instead of expecting everyone else to wait for him. And I began taking responsibility for my own life in a way I never had before. It turns out, When the person who always rescues everyone stops rescuing you, you either grow up or fall apart. We were lucky enough to do a little of both before we finally grew up. But the hardest part was not the chores. It was the truth. The truth sat in every room like furniture we had never noticed before. The truth was that Daniel had been asking for help in the only way he knew how, by getting quieter, by slowing down, by leaving crumbs of himself behind for us to find later, by hoping someone would finally ask, "What about you?" And nobody did. Not enough. Not soon enough. I still remember one night in November when I found Dad standing in Daniel's old room. He had not gone in there for weeks. He was just standing by the window, hands in his pockets, staring at the bed like it might start talking. I asked him what he was doing, and for a long time he did not answer. Then he said, "I do not know how I missed it." His voice was rough, ashamed, broken in a way I had never heard before. He sat on the edge of Daniel's bed and covered his face with both hands. "I thought he was just being helpful," he said. "I thought he liked doing all of it." I sat beside him and said, "He did it because he loved us." Dad nodded. Then I said, "And because he did not think he had a choice." That sentence hung between us. Heavy. True. Dad looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw the exact moment he understood. Not just guilt, understanding. Real understanding. The kind that hurts because it changes how you see yourself. He said, "I taught him that being useful was the same as being good." I did not answer right away, because I knew he was right. Maybe not entirely, but enough. Too much, even. That was the strange thing about Daniel leaving. It did not just expose his exhaustion, it exposed all of ours. Not the same kind, not in the same amount, but each of us had been participating in the shape of the problem. Emily expected him to calm her before she calmed herself. Mark expected him to smooth over every family conflict. Mom expected him to notice what she did not have the energy to notice. Dad expected him to be steady because Dad himself had been too tired for steadiness. And I expected him to be there because he always had been. Nobody said it out loud. That is how these things work. Not through one cruel act, through thousands of tiny assumptions. By Christmas, things were still fragile. We did not pretend otherwise. There was no magical healing montage. No perfect family dinner. No storybook reconciliation where everyone cried and then everything was fixed forever. That is not how real pain works. Real pain lingers. It sits on the edges of your life and waits for you to trip over it again. And we did trip over it again. A lot. Mom would still reach for her phone when she got overwhelmed, almost calling Daniel before remembering he was not our emergency contact anymore. Emily would cry at random when she found one of his favorite mugs in the cabinet. Mark would sometimes get defensive when anyone mentioned responsibility. Dad would fall silent whenever Daniel's name came up too suddenly. And me? I would keep checking my messages, hoping for a longer reply from him than the last one. But Daniel never came back to the old version of our family. He could not. And honestly, I do not think he should have, because the old version was built on him shrinking himself to keep us comfortable. On Christmas Eve, Daniel finally came over again. This time he stayed for dinner. Not because we begged, not because we guilted him. He came because he wanted to. That alone was a kind of miracle. He walked in carrying a pie from a bakery near his apartment. He looked calm, not cheerful, not fake, just calm. And when he smiled, it reached his eyes. That smile nearly undid me, because for years, I had seen Daniel smile while he was tired, smiling while he was hurting, smiling while he was carrying us. This time, the smile looked like it belonged to him. That was when I knew he had started coming back to himself. We ate dinner together. Dad burned the rolls. Mom laughed for real. Emily set the table without being told. Mark actually washed the dishes afterward. Nobody made Daniel serve himself first. Nobody handed him a list. Nobody dumped a problem in his lap before the plates were even cleared. We just sat there, the five of us, trying to be a family in a way that did not require one person to disappear. And somewhere between the second and third cup of tea, Daniel looked around the table and said, "This is better." That was all. Just 2 words. But they were enough. Because they told us something we had spent a whole year learning the hard way. Better does not mean perfect. Better means honest. Better means shared. Better means nobody has to carry the whole house on their back to keep it standing. After dinner, I walked Daniel outside. The air was cold, and the porch light made everything look soft and still. We stood there for a while without saying much. Then I asked him the question I had been afraid to ask for months. "Were you ever going to tell us how bad it really was?" He did not answer right away. He looked out at the street, then down at the snow on the steps, and finally said, "I tried." That was it. I tried. 2 words. And I felt them hit me like a wave. Because he was right. He had tried. In all the quiet ways a person can try. The long pauses, the tired eyes, the extra hours asleep on the couch, the skipped meals, the quiet withdrawal, the lessening of himself. He had tried to show us, but we were so used to his silence that we mistook it for strength. I swallowed hard and said, "I am sorry." He nodded once, slowly, not because he needed pity, because he needed truth. And I gave it to him. "I am sorry we made being the easy one your job," I said. "I am sorry we loved what you did more than we noticed what it cost you." Daniel looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something soft break open in his face. Not pain, relief. The relief of finally being seen, without having to perform for it. He exhaled and said, "Thank you." That night stayed with me. Not because it solved everything. It did not. But because it was the first time our family had ever spoken honestly enough to begin healing. Emotional survival. And I became someone stronger than I had ever been when I was just being looked after. Daniel kept his apartment. He kept his boundaries. He kept his peace. And somehow, that made him more present in our lives, not less. Because when a person stops being available as a constant rescue machine, they can finally show up as a whole human being. That is what happened with Daniel. He called when he wanted to call. He visited when he wanted to visit. He said no when he needed to say no. And every time he did, I felt proud of him in a way I did not know how to say out loud. The old guilt in me would still whisper sometimes. It would say, "He should be here more. He used to do more. Why does this feel different?" But then I remembered what he had lost by doing too much, and I shut that voice down. Because loving someone means wanting them alive in spirit, not just present in body. A year after he left, we had a family dinner that looked nothing like the old ones. No one rushed him. No one interrupted him. No one assumed he would handle the leftovers, the dishes, the chairs, the trash, the leftover cake, the call to grandma, the missing napkins, the broken lighter, the unanswered text. And because of that, Daniel laughed more than I had heard him laugh in years. It was such a small sound, but it filled the room. I remember looking around that table and realizing something painful and beautiful at the same time. The family had not fallen apart when Daniel left. It had simply been revealed. We had been standing on top of his exhaustion for so long that we mistook his suffering for stability. And once he stepped away, we were forced to build something real, something shared, something honest, something that did not depend on one gentle person carrying everyone else's weight in silence. There was one final thing Daniel told me later that I have never forgotten. We were sitting on the back steps of his apartment building on a warm spring evening, watching people pass by with groceries and dogs and little pieces of ordinary life. He said, "I used to think if I was useful enough, maybe I would be loved more." I looked at him, and my heart hurt all over again. He continued, "But now I think the people who really love you do not want you to disappear to earn it." I did not answer right away, because some truths are too clean to interrupt. I just sat there beside my brother, listening to the traffic, feeling the wind move through the trees, and wishing I could go back in time and protect him from all the years we failed him. But we cannot do that. All we can do is carry the lesson forward. So that is what I do now. I ask people how they are really doing. I notice the quiet ones. I do not let "I am fine" end the conversation if the eyes say otherwise. I do not treat the most helpful person in the room like a piece of furniture. And I try, every single day, to remember that kindness without. If you have made it this far, I want you to hold on to this one truth. Sometimes the person who keeps everyone else together is the one who is closest to breaking. Care can become another form of taking. Slow, emotional, close. Sometimes the quietest goodbye is the loudest lesson. Sometimes love means letting someone step away before the cost of staying becomes too high. And sometimes the family that feels strongest is only strong because one person has been quietly carrying all the weakness for everyone else. Daniel left without a scene, without shouting, without revenge, without making us chase him. And in that silence, he gave us the hardest gift of all. He gave us the chance to finally see him, not as the helper, not as the fixer, not as the one who always managed everything, but as a person who deserved rest, a person who deserved care, a person who deserved to be loved without having to earn it through self-erasure. And because of that, our family is not the same. We are better now. Not perfect. Better. We learned that a home is not held together by the person who sacrifices the most. It is held together by the people who finally learn to share the weight. And Daniel is still out there living his life, quietly, peacefully, in a way that finally belongs to him. And every time I think of him, I feel both sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the years we missed, gratitude for the day he left, because that was the day we stopped taking him for granted. That was the day we started changing. That was the day our family finally understood the value of the one person we had overlooked the most. The one who never asked for attention. The one who never made noise. The one who kept us together until he could not anymore. My brother, Daniel. There is one thing people never tell you about healing. It does not arrive like a miracle. It arrives like a habit. A small one. Then another. Then another. That was how our family changed after Daniel left. Not in one dramatic moment. Not in one apology. Not in one perfect dinner. It changed in tiny, ordinary ways that would have seemed meaningless to anyone else. But to us, they were everything. Mom started leaving her own chair untouched sometimes, just so she could notice if she was slipping back into her old pattern of doing too much. Dad started writing things down instead of expecting memory to do all the work. Mark began calling ahead before visiting, which sounds small, but in our family, it was practically a revolution. Emily learned how to comfort herself instead of waiting for someone else to rescue her from every bad feeling. And me? I learned how to stop confusing being needed with being loved. That was the hardest lesson, maybe for all of us. I think the deepest damage Daniel carried was not from one terrible event. It was from years of being treated like he was naturally built for endurance. Like kindness meant availability. Like calm meant he could take more. Like quiet meant he had no limits. He was the one who remembered everyone's favorite foods. But nobody remembered his favorite kind of rest. He knew how everyone took their coffee, but nobody knew when he last slept well. He could sense tension before anyone said a word, but nobody sensed his exhaustion before it became unbearable. That kind of loneliness is hard to explain to people, because it does not look like loneliness from the outside. It looks like competence. It looks like maturity. It looks like the person everyone says they are so lucky to have. But Daniel was not lucky. He was overused. And there is a difference. A huge difference. I remember one afternoon in early spring when I went to visit him at his apartment. He had moved a few things around since the last time I was there. There were plants by the window now, a small lamp with warm light, a stack of books on a shelf that actually looked chosen by him, not left over from the house, and a blanket on the couch that was clearly not folded for show. It felt lived in. It felt like a place where a person was allowed to exist instead of perform. He opened the door in jeans and a soft gray sweatshirt, and for a second I just stood there smiling because he looked peaceful. Not happy in the loud, bright way people post about online. Just peaceful. That peace made him look younger somehow. Less bent. Less burdened. More real. He let me in and made tea. He actually sat down while the water boiled. That alone used to feel impossible in our old house. I watched him lean against the counter, and I could not stop thinking about how strange it was that something as simple as watching my brother stand without tension could make me emotional. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. "What?" he asked with a small smile. I shook my head and said, "Nothing. It just still feels weird seeing you rest." He gave a quiet laugh, but there was sadness under it. "I know," he said. That answer stayed with me. I know, because of course he knew. He knew how strange peace felt after years of being on alert. He knew how unfamiliar rest became when your body got trained to serve before it slept. He knew because he had lived it. We sat together at the little table by his window and talked about ordinary things. Mid-job, his job, a movie he had watched, a sandwich place near his apartment, a ridiculous story about his neighbor's dog. At one point, I asked him if he ever missed home. He was quiet for a while before answering. "Yes," he said. Then, after another pause, "But not the version of home where I had no room to breathe." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was such a gentle sentence. No accusation, no anger, just honesty. And honesty can be more painful than shouting, because you cannot argue with it. I looked at him and said, "Did you ever think you were going to come back and just pretend nothing happened?" He smiled faintly. "No," he said. "I knew pretending would kill me faster than leaving." That was the first time I fully understood how serious his breaking point had been. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Serious. The kind of serious that happens quietly in a person's chest while the rest of the world keeps assuming they are fine. I sat there with my hands around my tea and felt a deep ache of regret settle over me. Not because I had hurt him directly, in some obvious way, but because I had been part of the silence that hurt him more slowly. That kind of guilt does not come with one clean apology. It becomes something you live with, something that teaches you to be better. When I got back home that evening, Mom was in the kitchen trying a new recipe. She had flour on her cheek and looked annoyed with the oven timer, but also oddly proud of herself. I smiled when I saw her, and then I realized something important. For the first time in years, she was trying something without depending on Daniel to make it easier. That mattered. It mattered so much, because it meant she was learning that love is not proven by how much you collapse for others. Sometimes love is proven by how much you learn to stand on your own. We all had to learn that. Even Dad. Especially Dad. He had been raised in a generation that often confused emotional absence with strength. He was not a bad man. He was just a man who had never been taught how to notice a quiet cry for help. But learning that did not excuse him. It just explained him. And explanation is not the same as forgiveness. Still, Watching him change gave me hope. He started checking in on Mom. I not with vague, "How are you?" questions, but actual attention. He would notice when she was overwhelmed. He would ask what she needed. He would do the thing without waiting to be told. That may sound ordinary, but in our family, it was new. Completely new. Then came the first time Daniel came to a birthday dinner. Mine. My 26th birthday. Mom wanted to make it special, but she was nervous because she was afraid Daniel would not come. I told her not to pressure him. I had learned by then that pressure was what had driven him away in the first place. So I said, if he comes, great. If he does not, we will still eat cake. She looked at me like she was seeing me differently. Maybe she was. Maybe that was part of growing up too. Not becoming colder. Just becoming clearer. Daniel arrived late afternoon, with a gift bag in one hand and flowers in the other. Not expensive flowers, just a mixed bunch from the grocery store. But I almost cried when I saw them, because Daniel was not the kind of person who bought flowers unless he really meant it. He hugged me carefully. Not the tight, rushed hug of someone trying to get through a social obligation. A real hug. Then he handed me the gift. Inside was a notebook and a pen. The notebook had a simple brown cover. No fancy design. Just plain and honest. He said, "For your thoughts. You never write things down, and you should." I laughed through my tears and told him that was such a Daniel gift. Practical, thoughtful, quietly meaningful. He smiled and said, "I figured you'd use it." I would. And I did. The dinner itself was not perfect. We still had awkward pauses. Mark still dominated too many conversations. Emily still interrupted occasionally. Dad still looked uncomfortable when emotions got too real. But Daniel stayed. He stayed in the room. He stayed in the conversation. He stayed in his own body. That was the real gift. Not that he came back. That he came back without surrendering himself again. At one point, Mark tried to make one of his usual jokes. The kind that used to get Daniel to smooth things over for everybody. But this time, Daniel did not rush to fix the mood. He just looked at him, calmly, and said, "That was not funny." The room went silent. Mark blinked, clearly not used to being corrected by the brother he had spent years relying on to absorb bad behavior. Then Daniel added, still calm, "You do not have to make everything a joke when people are being honest." It was not cruel. It was not loud. But it was powerful, because Mark had no choice but to hear him. And after a long second, Mark nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. That was the moment I think the rest of us understood, that Daniel had changed. He was still gentle, sticking, still the same soul, but now he had boundaries. And those boundaries did not make him smaller. They made him real. There was grief in that realization too, because the old Daniel was gone. The version of him that would let everything slide, solve everything, absorb everything, and never say a word about it. That Daniel was gone, and I missed him. I still miss him sometimes. Not because I want him to suffer. Never that. But because he was the version of him that made us feel safe without forcing us to be responsible. That kind of convenience is addictive. And when it disappears, people call the new reality change, as if change is always bad. It is not. Sometimes change is the first honest thing a person has done in years. After dinner, I pulled Daniel aside and asked him something I had wanted to ask for a long time. "Do you resent us?" He looked at me with that steady expression he had always had when he was being careful with the truth. Then he said, "No." I waited. He continued, "Resentment would mean I expected more from you than you were able to give. I expected too much, yes, but not because I thought you were evil, because I thought I could survive it." That answer stayed with me for days, maybe even longer, because it was so mature, so heartbreaking. He was not angry because we were monsters. He was hurt because he had confused endurance with love. And when that expectation failed him, he left. Not to punish us, to preserve what was left of himself. A few weeks later, something happened that I will never forget. Emily had a bad night. She came home from school upset after a fight with a friend. She was crying hard, breathing too fast, spiraling the way she used to. Old habits almost took over. I almost called Daniel. Almost. But then I stopped. I sat with her instead. I rubbed her back. I told her to breathe. I made tea. I listened. I did not rush to outsource her pain to the person who had always carried it. And something incredible happened. She calmed down. Not instantly, not magically, but she calmed down. And when she looked up at me afterward, tired and red-eyed, she said, "I didn't know you could do that." I smiled sadly and told her, "Neither did I." That moment mattered more than she knew, because it proved that Daniel's leaving had not just exposed our dependence, it had also forced our growth. Sometimes the person who leaves teaches the people who stay how to finally become useful to each other. Not in the old, exhausting way. In a healthier one. In a human one. I do not want to make it sound easy. It was not. There were still days when Mom broke down in guilt. Days when Dad got frustrated with himself. Days when Mark shut down instead of communicating. Days when I felt angry all over again that we had needed such a painful lesson to learn something so basic. But healing is not a clean road. It is a repeating decision. You keep deciding to show up better than before. You keep deciding not to repeat the old pattern. You keep deciding to honor the person who had to walk away in order to survive. Daniel became that person for us. Note, a martyr. Not a villain, just a mirror. One night, close to the end of that first year after he left, I found the family photo album in the hall closet. I sat on the floor and flipped through old pictures. There he was at age 7, standing in a crooked birthday hat beside a cake he probably did not want. There he was at 13, holding a sleeping Emily in his arms after she fell asleep on the couch. There he was at 16, carrying grocery bags while Mark complained about the heat. There he was at 22, wiping spilled punch off the carpet at a family event while everyone laughed about something else. In every picture he was helping. In every picture he was present. In every picture he was doing more than his share. And what struck me most was this. Not once did I find a picture of Daniel being cared for in the way he cared for everyone else. Not once. That absence hurt me, because it showed just how normal the imbalance had become. We had built an entire family history around one person's self-erasure and called it love. That is a dangerous thing. A cruel thing, even when no cruelty is intended. I closed the album and sat there on the hallway floor for a long time. Then I made a decision. I would not let Daniel disappear into the past like some quiet sacrifice nobody learned from. I would remember him correctly. I would tell the story, honestly. I would not polish away the pain just because it made us uncomfortable. Because comfort is not the same as truth. And truth is what saved us. Eventually. So, this is what I know now. The quietest people in a family are not always the weakest. Sometimes they are the strongest. Sometimes they are the ones holding every loose thread together with tired hands nobody sees. And sometimes, when they finally let go, the family that depended on them has no choice but to learn how to stand on its own. Daniel taught us that. By leaving, by surviving, by refusing to keep disappearing for our comfort. And the strange thing is, I think that was the first truly loving thing he did for all of us. Not because it was easy, not because it was soft, but because it was honest enough to wake us up. My brother did not leave in anger. He left in silence. And that silence changed everything. Because once he was gone, we finally heard what his kindness had been trying to say all along. I cannot be the only one carrying this family forever. And that was not the end of it. Because once a family learns what it has been doing, the real question becomes whether it will change when nobody is forcing it to. That question followed us everywhere. Into the kitchen, into the car, into Sunday dinners, into every small conversation that used to end with Daniel quietly fixing the tension before anyone had to sit inside it. Now we had to sit inside it. And honestly, that was uncomfortable. But discomfort is sometimes the first honest sign that something is finally becoming better. The first real test came when Mom got sick. Not seriously sick. Not life-threatening. But enough to slow her down. Enough to make her stay in bed for 2 days with a fever and no energy. In the old days, the whole family would have instinctively looked for Daniel. Where is Daniel? What is Daniel doing? Can Daniel handle this? Can Daniel pick up the medicine? Can Daniel make soup? Can Daniel drive Mom to the doctor? That was the pattern. That was the reflex. But this time, Daniel was not there to absorb the panic. So we had to act. And what happened next shocked me. Dad got the medicine. Mark picked up groceries. Emily cleaned the living room so Mom could rest without looking at the mess. And I sat beside her bed, taking her temperature and bringing her water. Nobody collapsed. Nobody died. Nobody needed rescuing by the one person we had once treated like an emergency service. The house survived. More than survived, actually. It functioned. Not perfectly, but enough. And that enough mattered more than I can explain, because it proved something Daniel had been trying to teach us for years. We were capable. We had just become lazy in the places where he was generous. When Mom finally sat up in bed and looked around at all of us, she cried. Not because she was still sick, because she realized we were doing it. We were actually doing it without Daniel. She covered her face and said, I should have taught you all this sooner. Nobody answered immediately. Then I said, maybe, but we can learn now. That sentence became a kind of family motto after that. We can learn now. It was not dramatic. It was not pretty. But it was true. We had spent so many years trapped inside the lie that Daniel's overload was normal, that learning a healthier way of being a family felt almost revolutionary. A month later, Daniel invited us to his apartment for dinner. All of us. For the first time. Not because he was trying to prove anything. Not because he was obligated. Because he wanted to share a piece of his life with us on his terms. I remember how nervous Mom looked the night before. She kept saying she did not want to bring the wrong thing. Dad asked 3 times if we should come early. Mark tried to pretend he did not care, but he absolutely cared. Emily picked out her nicest sweater. And me? I felt this quiet ache in my chest all day because I knew this was not just a dinner. It was a boundary being honored, a life being respected, a family being invited into a version of Daniel that did not belong to our old expectations. When we arrived, his apartment smelled like garlic and rosemary. He had made pasta, real pasta, not takeout, not a rushed compromise. He had cooked for us because he wanted to, and because now he could do so without resentment. That alone moved me more than I expected. The table was small, so we pulled up extra chairs. It was crowded and imperfect and kind of beautiful. There were mismatched plates, too little space, too much wine for Dad, who immediately started talking too loudly. Emily laughed when the sauce dripped onto the floor. Mark offered to help and actually did. Mom complimented the food in that sincere way that made Daniel look a little embarrassed. And I sat there looking at him across the table, thinking how strange it was to feel both relief and grief at the same time. Relief because he looked well. Grief because I knew how long it had taken for him to reach this point. During dessert, Mom asked the question we had all been trying not to force. "Daniel," she said gently, "are you happier now?" He did not answer right away. He looked down at his plate for a moment, then up at all of us. "I am freer," he said. That was his answer. Not a dramatic declaration, not a perfect, polished statement, just honest, freer. And somehow that word carried everything, because freedom was what he had never had in our old family dynamic. Not really. He had duty, responsibility, expectations, need. But freedom? No, not until he left. And hearing him say it out loud made something inside me settle, because I realized he was not saying he hated us. He was saying he finally had room to breathe. There is a difference. A huge one. After dinner, Mark stayed behind to help Daniel clean up. That alone would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Mark, who used to assume things happen because someone else would handle them, now stood at the sink washing dishes in silence. Daniel glanced over and said, "You do not have to do that." Mark nodded and kept washing. Then he said, "I know. I want to." That was not a small moment. That was a change in identity. Not being forced, choosing. That is what adulthood should look like. Not someone else carrying you until you become helpless, but learning how to carry your own part because you understand it matters. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stayed behind for a few minutes. Daniel was putting leftovers into containers when I asked him if he ever regretted leaving. He looked thoughtful. Then he said, "I regret not leaving earlier. I felt that answer in my bones." He continued, "I spent years trying to earn a place in this family by making myself useful, but nobody should have to earn rest inside their own home." That sentence made me turn away for a second because my eyes filled too fast. Nobody should have to earn rest inside their own home. What a simple truth. What a devastating truth. And what a shame that it took him leaving for us to understand it. Winter turned into spring. Spring into summer, and with every season our family kept learning. Not quickly, not cleanly,